What if Ned Stark hadn't died in that dark cell beneath the Red Keep? What if Robb Stark's rage hadn't erupted into reckless war, but instead something colder, more calculated? The godswood in Winterfell stood silent that evening. The old gods watched as Lord Eddard Stark sat beneath the ancient heart tree, his face gaunter than before, his eyes sharper. The ravens had flown far and fast. Word had reached him, carried through trusted whispers and broken letters. He knew Robert was dead. He knew Cersei had taken the throne for her son. But more importantly, he knew the South was ready to burn. He also knew he would not burn with it. Robb stood by his father's side, no longer a boy, not yet a king. His jaw was clenched tight, his knuckles white. "You should have sent word. Sooner," he muttered, eyes on the snow-covered ground. "I couldn't risk the wrong ears," Ned said, voice heavy with the kind of weariness that only comes from betrayal. Littlefinger was watching, Varys listening. The walls had eyes. Robb's voice cracked just slightly. "They said you died. Master Lewin told us you were executed. Beheaded. They wanted you to believe that." Ned glanced toward the godswood branches swaying above them. "But Varys helped me escape. The spider spun a web too tangled for the Lannisters to see." There was a pause. "Long cold, and now?" Robb asked. "Now." That word hung in the air like breath on frost. "Now we do what the South never expected," Ned replied. "We unite. But here's where it gets crazy. Because what happens next is not just a rebellion. It's a birth of a new kingdom, one forged not in the name of vengeance, but of preservation, legacy, and survival." Catelyn Tully had returned to Riverrun. She had watched her son march to war once before. She had lost him to it. But now she saw something different in his eyes. Strategy, patience. He wasn't racing to war. He was building something. Piece by piece, the Riverlands were already cracking under the weight of Lannister boots. The Freys were arrogant, the Brackens and Blackwood still locked in ancient feuds. The Lannisters believed that splitting the Riverlands would keep them weak. But they hadn't counted on Riverrun's blood being northern too. They hadn't counted on Catelyn. Ned met her in Riverrun's war room, a map of Westeros spread before them. His hand brushed the edges of the north, Robb's hand near the Riverlands. Catelyn's eyes darted between them. "You're proposing a single realm?" "A single kingdom," Ned said. "A crownless alliance will fall, but a united banner under one name. We can protect our people and build something the South can't touch." Robb glanced at his mother. "They'll call it treason." "They already did," she replied softly, and just like that, the lines were drawn. But not with fire and fury. With ink, with blood, with oaths. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, things were beginning to unravel. Fast. "Wait, what? Ned Stark's alive?" Jaime Lannister shouted, slamming his goblet on the small council table. Cersei narrowed her eyes. "It's a rumor. Rumors." "There have started wars," Tyrion muttered, leaning back in his chair, wine sloshing lazily. "Then let's start ours," Cersei snapped, but even she didn't realize. They were already losing. Not because swords were drawn, but because houses were aligning. Back in the north, ravens soared. House Manderly swore fealty, publicly. The Karstarks followed. Even the Flints of Widow's Watch declared for the kingdom of the North and Trident. But the game changer? When Howland Reed, the most elusive man in the realm, rode out from the neck and bent the knee. He brought with him secrets from the Tower of Joy, secrets Ned had tried to bury. Secrets that would change everything, if ever spoken aloud. "I followed you once, Ned Stark," Howland said, kneeling before the man. "I'll follow you again." "Okay, pause. Because this is the moment that breaks everything we knew from the original story. Ned Stark is no longer the honorable fool who dies because of honesty. He's the architect of a kingdom, the father of a ruler, the shadow in the north that will haunt the Lannisters. And what he does next? Trust me, you won't believe who he offers the crown to. Not himself. Not even Robb. Instead, he proposed a council, an ancient northern tradition. Lords and ladies gathered in Moat Cailin, halfway between Winterfell and the Neck. A hall of voices. The name they all whispered? Robb Stark. Not just king in the north, but king of the north and Riverlands. And here's the twist. Robb said no. Titles won't protect us, he said. Unity will. Ned stood, looked at the faces in the hall. If he won't take the crown, he said, voice ringing with command, then I will take the burden, not for glory, but for war, and peace, if the gods allow. For the first time in over 1,000 years, House Stark ruled more than the North. They ruled the heart of Westeros, and just as it was declared, the River Lords began raising armies, not for conquest, but for defense. In secret, Glover's ships slipped down the Trident. Manderley men disguised as fishermen built camps along the Blackwater Rush. They weren't attacking, they were watching, waiting, because Ned knew war would come. He just didn't know how fast. In the Red Keep, Joffrey's crown weighed heavier by the hour. Spies reported camps forming near Harrenhal. Lannister scouts disappeared. Gold cloaks caught whispers of Stark banners at the Twins. Tommen cried in his bed. Cersei drank. More wine, Tywin? Tywin sharpened his quill and sent ravens of his own, to the Reach. Because if the North and Riverlands were won, the South would have to become something darker. And what house rises when war falls? Not the Baratheons, not the Lannisters, but the snakes beneath the rock. The raven arrived at midnight. Its wings were torn, feathers slicked with dried blood. The scroll tied to its leg was sealed with gold wax, bearing the lion of House Lannister. Maester Luwin unrolled it in silence. When he read the words aloud to Ned, the air in Winterfell turned to stone. His Grace Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, demands the immediate surrender of the traitor Eddard Stark, the bastard Robb Stark, and all known collaborators. Failure to comply will be considered a declaration of war. Robb stood up before. The last word was spoken. His voice cut through the hall like a blade. Then let them come. But Ned didn't respond. He turned away from the fire and stared out into the snow-covered courtyard. His silence wasn't fear. It was calculation, because he knew Tywin Lannister better than Joffrey ever would. He knew this wasn't a threat. It was a beginning, and the first move had already been made. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles south, in the black stone halls of Harrenhal, Tywin Lannister was already moving. Make no mistake, he told his gathered bannermen, this isn't just rebellion. It's sedition wrapped in honor, and it will burn the realm if we don't crush it. The lords around him nodded, some with hesitation, others, like Sir Gregor Clegane, with bloodlust in their eyes. But not all. Lannister allies were sold. Randyll Tarly stood in silence, arms crossed. The North is united, the Riverlands too. This won't be like putting down the Tullys alone. Tywin didn't blink. Which is why we will not go alone. He turned, and behind him, a Dornish rider stepped forward. House Martell. Dorne. Stays out of northern wars, Tywin said calmly. But if the North threatens King's Landing directly, they've agreed to join the defense of the realm. And just like that, Tywin played a piece no one expected. Not a sword. A snake. Back in Winterfell, Ned met with Robb and the most loyal northern lords in the crypts, where generations of Starks lay cold and silent. We don't attack first, Ned said. That's what they expect. That's what they need to rally. The Reach and Dorne, Robb paced. So we wait. No, Ned said, we build, and here's where it gets insane. Because instead of going to war, Ned Stark begins to fortify the neck. Moat Cailin is rebuilt. Watchtowers rise along the Green Fork. The Twins are reinforced with Tully engineers and northern stoneworkers. And secretly, Ned begins sending ravens west to the Iron Islands. Pause for a second, because this is where the South loses its grip completely. The Lannisters thought they were playing the Game of Thrones, but Ned Stark, he started building a new board. The Ironborn weren't loyal to anyone, not even to each other, but they were hungry. And Balon Greyjoy, still nursing his pride from the failed rebellion, answered Ned's message with bitter curiosity. I remember. The wolves storming my castle, Balon sneered to the Raven-bearer. And now they want my ships? The Raven-bearer said nothing, just handed him a second scroll, sealed with wax shaped like a kraken. Balon broke it. Inside were only 3 words: sail south, pillage gold, and a crude map of Lannisport. Meanwhile, in the Vale, Littlefinger watched chaos rise with the same gleam in his eyes that always followed blood. He met with Lysa Arryn beneath the Ares moon door, speaking sweet poison. The Starks will pull you into their war, he said. And the Lannisters will never forgive a Tully sister for standing by her family. But what should I do? Lisa asked nervously. Petyr smiled. Do nothing. But in secret he sent word to King's Landing. He was always the coin between wolves and lions. He just needed to see which one would pay more. Robb rode hard to River Run. The River Lords were restless. They wanted blood. The Freys were quiet. Too quiet. Walder Frey had agreed to send men but hadn't moved a single one. They're waiting to see who wins, Robb said bitterly. Catelyn nodded. As always. But we won't give them the chance. He pulled out a rolled banner, sealed in wax with the direwolf and the silver trout. A new standard, a new flag, one kingdom, one house, and under that flag he called a great assembly of the Riverlands, inviting Brackens, Blackwoods, Freys, Darris, and every house big and small. But when they arrived, Robb didn't give a speech. Ned did, and it shook the walls. We are not rebels, Ned said, his voice echoing across River Run's great hall. We are not traitors. We are not oathbreakers. We are men and women defending our homes from a realm that has forgotten us. He paused, looked into the faces of those gathered. Lords, ladies, heirs. You've bled for kings who never rode north of the Trident. You've sent sons to wars that never touched your land. And when the South suffers, they tax you. When you suffer, they ignore you. He held up a sword, not ice, but a reforged blade. Half Stark steel, half Tully forged. It ends now. Meanwhile, back in King's Landing, Tyrion Lannister stood by a window, watching the storm clouds roll in. You feel that? He asked. Varys the Spider looked up. What? The realm trembling. Varys said nothing for a while. Then, he's not just building a kingdom, you know. Tyrion raised an eyebrow. Oh? He's building a legend, and just when you think it's going to slow down, it gets worse. A raven arrived from Pike. Balon Greyjoy had sacked Lannisport, burned the docks, taken dozens of gold ships. The sea was now open for raiders. And Tywin Lannister? He vanished, no word, no sightings, no ravens. Tywin Lannister disappeared from Harrenhal without a sound. Not even his own commanders knew where he'd gone. No fanfare, no declarations, just a handful of men, a sealed wagon, and the whisper of hooves vanishing into the Stormlands. The silence was intentional, because Tywin wasn't riding for battle. He was riding for Old Town. Wait, what? Why Old Town? Because while Ned Stark fortified Moat Cailin and Robb stitched the Riverlands to the north, Tywin sought the one weapon neither man had, legitimacy. In the stone halls of the citadel, among the grey robes and rusted chains, Tywin met with archmaesters who still remembered the days before Robert's rebellion. He didn't threaten them, he bribed them, gold, secrets, promises, and in exchange, a single letter, stamped with the seal of the Faith of the Seven, declaring Robb Stark and Eddard Stark excommunicated for treason against the crown and the faith, a political death sentence. And worse, an excuse for every southern lord to raise arms against them without guilt. Meanwhile, the Vale trembled. Whispers flew faster than ravens. Ned Stark had sent word to Robin Arryn, not as a plea, but as a warning. The lions are coming. They'll march through the mountains, burn your villages, and call it justice. Lysa didn't respond, but Littlefinger did. He told her Ned was manipulating her, that joining the war would mean the Eyrie falling. Then, Betrayal. Peter Baelish sent a raven to Tywin in secret. The Vale is neutral, he wrote, but their gates are open. I can ensure your army crosses the bloody gate without resistance, for the right price. Tywin didn't reply. He didn't need to, because he was already inside the Vale, and with him came 20,000 men. Half Lannister bannermen, half hired swords, none loyal to anyone but gold. By the time Lisa realized what was happening, it was too late. The Eyrie stood tall, but the valleys below, flooded with red and gold. And here's where it gets insane, because Ned had planned for battles in the neck. Not a southern invasion from the east, not the Eyrie falling from within. Ravens flooded into Winterfell and River Run, Blackwood scouts spotted, Lannister banners cutting through the mountain passes. Glover outriders vanished in the fingers, and the worst? The twins had opened their gates. Walder Frey had done what Walder Frey always did. He smiled, he lied, he waited. And when the gold came, he betrayed the North without blinking. Robb slammed his fist on the war table so hard, he cracked the wood. "Sold us out," Ned nodded grimly. "As expected." "You expected this?" "I expected he'd choose his skin over honor." And that's when they realized the South wasn't marching north, the South was already inside. Okay, pause. Because this is where everything flips. You thought this was a war of armies? Nah, it's a war of betrayals, and the next one comes from inside Riverrun itself. Edmure Tully, always eager to prove himself, had been coordinating defenses. But Littlefinger, that slippery snake, had already sown doubt in his mind. "You really think the North will let a Tully sit second forever?" he had whispered. "They've already made Robb king. What happens to your name when the Riverlands are absorbed?" It festered. So when a Lannister envoy arrived, promising Riverrun would be spared if Edmure gave up the Stark plans, he didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. And somehow, the Lannisters knew Robb's troop movements the next morning, in Nye. Retaliation. House Blackwood burned a fray outpost. Dozens died. The Red Fork turned crimson. The fragile alliance between river lords began to fracture. Tensions snapped between Brackens and Darrys. Even Tully Bannerman began questioning the plan. Robbie sat in silence at the war table, and then he said something no one expected. "We ride." Ned looked at his son. "Where?" "To the Vale. You'd abandon the Neck." "I'd abandon nothing," Robb growled. "But if Tywin's in the Vale and the Freys betrayed us, then we strike where they think we won't." "Through the mountains?" Catelyn asked. Robb shook his head. "Through the rivers. And here's where the young wolf earns his name. Because under moonlight, using boats stolen from the Ironborn, Robb Stark sails half his army down the Trident, through twisting waters, behind enemy lines, straight into the heart of the Vale. River strike unseen, unheard, until it was far too late. While Lannister forces burned the edges of the Bloody Gate, Robb emerged from the rivers below the Eyrie, cold, silent, with 10,000 northern warriors at his back. The Battle of the Vale didn't last a day, it lasted an hour, because Tywin Lannister had made one mistake. He trusted the high ground. He didn't expect wolves to swim, and while Robb painted the Vale red, Ned sent a final raven to Dorne, not with threats, not with bribes, but with a secret. Jon Snow's name. His mother. His blood, and a dagger wrapped in silk, the same one used in the attempt on Bran's life, a dagger linked to Littlefinger, a dagger that once belonged to a Dornish assassin. Now the game is on a whole new level, because if Dorne rides north, King's Landing won't survive, and if Littlefinger's web begins to collapse, neither will the Lannisters. The raven reached Sunspear as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, bathing Dorne in molten gold. Prince Doran Martell, weary from years of watching and waiting, broke the Stark seal with trembling fingers. He read the letter once, then again. No threats, no bribes, just one truth. Rhaegar Targaryen's son lived, and his name was Jon Snow. Ned Stark had kept him hidden, safe, out of reach from the throne, the dragons, and the dagger that tore the realm apart. Attached to the scroll was the knife, dragonglass, hilt Valyrian steel blade, the same one said to have Dornish origin, the same one Catelyn Stark had once claimed belonged to Tyrion Lannister, but now, according to Ned's letter, had passed through the hands of Peter Baelish. Doran set the scroll down, then whispered just 2 words to his captain, "Summon Ilaria." Back in the north, Ned stood at the battlements of Moat Cailin. Snow fell thick and fast. Beneath it, the Neck turned to mud and blood, but the defenses held. The march from the Vale had slowed Tywin's forces. His vanguard had been shattered by Robb's surprise strike, but Ned knew Tywin wasn't beaten. Not yet, because Tywin never fights battles to win. He fights them to send messages, and the one he was about to send would be written in fire. In Riverrun, the betrayal was complete. Edmure had confessed, not to treason, not outright, but to passing a sealed letter to a neutral Maester, one he thought was simply requesting supply movements for grain. The Lannisters had struck 2 days later, at the exact spot Robb's supply lines ran through. Ned didn't shout. He didn't banish Edmure, didn't have him arrested. He simply looked at him for a long, quiet moment and said, "You've lost your voice in the council." That was worse than punishment. It was erasure. But here's where things start to flip. Because, while Tywin plots in the Vale and the Freys seal their treachery with gold, Jon Snow walks into Winterfell, and nothing is the same. He'd ridden hard from Castle Black, summoned not by a raven, but by ghostly dreams of wolves burning and shadows with lion eyes. When he entered the Great Hall, he found Ned waiting. The sea. Last time they'd seen each other, Jon had been just a boy, grateful, ashamed, full of questions. Now, he was a man, a warrior, but not yet. A king. Ned didn't waste time. "There's something you need to know," he said, gesturing to a chair beside the fire. Jon remained standing. "Is it true, what they say about my mother?" Ned nodded slowly. "Her name was Lyanna. You are not my son, but you are of my blood." Jon flinched but didn't speak. "You are Rhaegar Targaryen's heir," Ned continued. "But more than that, you are a Stark, and I raised you as such because I knew what this truth would do if it were ever revealed." Jon turned away, gripping the edge of the hearth. "I'm not a prince." "No," Ned said. "You're something far more dangerous." Jon looked at him, unsure. Ned stepped closer. "You're the one person who could unite the kingdoms, or destroy them." Okay, chills. Because now Jon isn't just a wild card, he's the key to everything. And the first one to realize that is Tyrion Lannister. The small council chamber stank of sweat and tension. Cersei slammed her goblet down. "They're calling him a king now. Robb Stark rides through the Vale like he owns it. Dorne hasn't answered our ravens, and now they're saying Ned Stark has raised a Targaryen bastard." Tyrion took a long drink. "He's not just a bastard," she narrowed her eyes. "You believe it?" "I believe Varys hasn't denied it." "And what does that mean?" Tyrion stood, walked to the window, watched the clouds gather over King's Landing. "It means, for the first time in this war, someone other than Joffrey has a claim to the throne that people might actually follow." In Sunspear, Ilaria Sand marched through the palace gardens, gripping the letter in her hand. "You're going to war for Ned Stark's words?" she asked Doran. "We've lost too many Martells already." "This isn't for Ned," he said, voice low. "This is for Elia." The name hit like a slap. Elia Martell, Rhaegar's wife, murdered during Robert's rebellion. Her children slaughtered. Her legacy erased. This boy, Jon Snow, is her stepson, her husband's blood. Ilaria hesitated. "And what will the people say? That we ride for ghosts?" Doran shook his head. "No. They will say we ride for vengeance." Now let me break this down real quick. The map just shifted completely. The northern Riverlands are won, the Vale is bleeding, the Ironborn are still raiding the western coast. The Reach remains quiet, for now. But dawn is waking up, and at the center of it all, Jon Snow. In Winterfell, Robb returned, mud-covered, sword still bloody from the Vale, but his eyes lit up when he saw Jon. They embraced like brothers, not rivals, and yet, beneath the warmth, a quiet tension grew. Robb was king by vote. Jon was king by blood. Robb had won battles. Jon had been given a birthright. Neither wanted the other's crown. But the lords of the north, they had begun to whisper, and whispers are louder than banners. Meanwhile in Harrenhal, Arya Stark watched the fires burn. She was older now, harder, a shadow with a sword and no name. She'd followed the trail of her family's enemies back to Harrenhal, wearing faces, listening in silence, and what she heard from the mouths of Lannister captains changed everything. Littlefinger was playing both sides. The dagger had come from him, and he had just arrived in King's Landing, with plans to make a move on the Iron Throne itself, because Peter Baelish didn't want a war to end. He wanted it to burn until the only thing left was ash and opportunity. But what he didn't know, Arya was coming with a list, and his name was at the top. The storm that hit King's Landing didn't come from the sea. It came from the south. Dorne had declared war, not with trumpets, not with banners, but with fire. A Dornish fleet, flying no flags, slipped past the red wine patrols and torched 3 Lannister supply ships docked at Blackwater Bay. Smoke rose above the capital before dawn, thick and black, choking the air. By the time the guards responded, the attackers were gone. All that remained was a single banner, a red sun pierced by a spear drenched in blood. Cersei screamed when she saw it. She paced the council chambers barefoot, robe undone, hair wild. "Burn Sunspear to the ground," she spat. "I want every snake flayed." Tyrion sipped his wine. "Dawn's already in flames, and you're pouring oil." Varys watched quietly, fingers steepled. "They won't stop now," Tyrion added. "They've wanted revenge since Elia died, and now they have a cause, and a prince." Cersei turned sharply. "He's not a prince. Maybe not in name, but in blood." Tyrion nodded slowly. "He's Rhaegar's son, and the realm loves stories like that." "Okay, let me stop right here for a second, because this is where the war stops being about territory and becomes about legacy." Back in Winterfell, the Great Hall was packed. Northern lords, river lords, even ironborn envoys. All eyes were on Jon Snow. The truth had been revealed. Ned Stark stood before the crowd and spoke it aloud, calmly, clearly. "Jon is the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, born in Dorne, hidden to protect him from Robert's wrath." There was silence. Then shouting, some roared in disbelief, others in fury, but one voice rose above them all. "Great Jon Umber," he slammed his fist on the table. "If he's got the blood of the dragon, then what in 7 hells is he doing in our hall?" Robb stood. "He's my brother." "By name," another lord barked. "But if he's Rhaegar's heir, he's not just your brother, he's the South's next king." Jon didn't flinch. He stepped forward, looked them all in the eyes. "I don't want a crown," he said. "I never have. I took the black, I stood on the wall, I fought for the living, not the throne." "But that's the problem, isn't it?" Lady Mage Mormont said, her eyes narrowed. "You're the one man who doesn't want the throne, and that's why people would follow you." Meanwhile, in the Riverlands, Arya moved like a ghost. She'd watched Littlefinger ride from Harrenhal to King's Landing, whispering secrets and collecting promises. But now, she was inside the capital. No one knew. Not even Sansa. Still held. At court, Arya wore the face of a stable boy. She cleaned stables, fetched water, listened, and one night, she slipped into Littlefinger's quarters. Inside, she found a hidden drawer. Maps, letters, a list of names. One name circled in ink over and over again, Jon Snow. Pause, because what Arya does next changes everything. She doesn't kill Baelish, not yet, she stalks him. And in one moonless night she follows him to a hidden chamber beneath the Sept of Baelor. There she hears him speaking to 2 strangers in golden cloaks. One of them removes their hood. It's Lancel Lannister, the faith militant. Littlefinger whispers, "If the boy becomes king, we all burn. But if he's condemned by the faith, if the 7 denounce him as a bastard born of sin," Lancel nods slowly, "then the people won't follow him. And I will be your new master of whisperers," Littlefinger adds, smiling. Arya clenched. Her teeth. She had heard enough. She didn't need to strike yet. She needed proof, because this time her kill wouldn't be personal. It would be political. Back in Sunspear, Prince Doran wrote a second raven. This one addressed to Robb Stark. It read, "You seek peace, we seek justice. Let us forge both, in fire and blood." Attached was a map. 3 Dornish legions were already marching through the Red Mountains, heading toward the Reach, their target, Old Town, not for conquest, but for silence. Because the Faith's excommunication decree, the one Tywin had bought, came from Old Town's influence: burn the source, silence the lie. Now here's where the realm begins to crack openly, because the Faith in King's Landing begins preaching against Dorne, against the North, against bastards and dragons. They call Jon the false flame. The streets begin to echo with fear. Tension. Sparrows line the Sept steps. Gold cloaks turn their eyes away from riots. The city teeters. And inside the Red Keep, Joffrey begins to lose control. He screams at his guards, flogs a maid for bringing cold wine, strangles a hound in the courtyard. Even Cersei flinches. Tyrion sees it all and knows it's time. That same night, Tyrion sneaks into Varys's chambers. "We can't wait for the war to end," Tyrion whispers. "We need a replacement." Varys raises an eyebrow. "For Joffrey?" "No," Tyrion says. "For the realm." In the north, a decision is made, not by Jon, not by Robb, but by the people, the lords, the warriors, the small folk. They begin chanting it themselves. Snow, snow, snow. He walks among them like a man being buried in gold. He doesn't want it, but that doesn't matter anymore, because the war isn't about who wants the crown. It's about who the realm needs. And then, just as dawn nears Old Town, just as Arya prepares her strike, just as the Faith readies their judgment, Joffrey dies poisoned during supper, foaming at the mouth, eyes bursting red, and the cup was poured by a servant no one remembers seeing before. Oh yeah, you already know who it was, Arya. And Littlefinger, he just became the prime suspect. Joffrey Baratheon died choking on his own breath, thrashing against the stone floor of the great hall like a wounded animal. His face turned black, his lips foamed, and not a soul dared move. Cersei screamed. Tyrion stood frozen, wine still in. And in the far corner, a servant dropped a silver pitcher and vanished into the crowd. Arya Stark was already gone. By sunrise, the Red Keep was a furnace of suspicion. Goldcloaks flooded the city, yanking servants from beds, dragging cooks and stable hands into the square for public interrogation. Cersei was unhinged, wailing, accusing, spitting venom at anyone within. Reach! But she had one name on her tongue. Tyrion. He hated Joffrey, she hissed to the council. He mocked him in front of the court. He's always wanted power. Tyrion, stone-faced, didn't deny it. He only said, "I may drink like a fool, but I don't kill like one." And still, he was shackled. Okay, pause. Because the death of Joffrey, that wasn't just a twist. It was the matchstick. Now the Iron Throne is empty, the Faith is raging, and the war for the realm just became a free-for-all. Back in Winterfell, the news came with two ravens, one from Varys, one from the Vale. The first simply read, "The lion cub is dead, the city bleeds. The moment is now." The second came from Lady Lisa Arryn, and this one was a trap. Robb wanted to move immediately. "Cersei will lash out," he told Ned. "She'll claim Jon is behind it. She'll send the Faith north." "She won't need to," Ned replied. "If the Vale turns on us again, the neck becomes a noose." But Jon, quiet, watching, finally spoke. "We're not marching south," Robb turned. "Then what?" "We call a council," Jon said. "Not of kings, not of generals, of people. Lords, yes, but also masters, warriors, even small folk, the ones who've actually suffered." Robb frowned. "To what end?" "To offer them something no king has ever given them," Jon said. "A choice." What Jon proposed shook the hall. He didn't want a crown. He didn't want the throne. He wanted to dismantle the game, a realm not ruled by one bloodline or throne, but governed by unity between the free kingdoms, a confederation of realms, the North, the Riverlands, Dorne, the Reach, even the Iron Islands, if they could be tamed. Not under one ruler, under a council of equals. It was radical, it was dangerous, it was possible, and it terrified every noble who heard it. But in Dorne, it inspired action. Prince Doran declared his full support. "We do not kneel to dragons," he said, "nor lions, but to peace. We may just bend." The Martells pushed harder. Old Town fell not by fire, but by bribery and betrayal. Dornish gold bought harbour guards. Maesters were escorted out under threat of death. The Faith's grip loosened, and with the flames of the High Septon's sermons silenced. The excommunication of the North revoked. Meanwhile, Arya stayed in the shadows of King's Landing. She didn't run after Joffrey's death, she hunted. Littlefinger had vanished after the poisoning, whispered into the darkness, moved through tunnels behind banners, but Arya had followed him through worse. And when she caught him, it wasn't a knife to the throat. It was a confession, whispers planted in Lysa's ear, the dagger given to the assassin for Bran, the betrayal of Ned in the throne room, the manipulation of Sansa, The rise through chaos, every secret, every sin, and Arya took it all to Varys. Varys didn't react, not with shock, not with fear, just a small smile. I've waited years for this. In the dungeons beneath the Red Keep, Tyrion waited for his execution. Then the door creaked open. I told you I'd repay my debts, said Varys, and together they vanished into the night. Now let me hit you with this. Tyrion Lannister escapes. Execution. And where does he go? Not Essos north. He arrives at Moat Cailin under cloak and frost. He stands before Ned and Jon and says, I drank, I joked, I lost everything. Then he reaches into his cloak and pulls out Littlefinger's Moy. Confession signed, witnessed, sealed. Ned took it, read it, and for a moment, just a flicker, he almost smiled. Justice, he said, and for once, the word didn't feel empty. Meanwhile, Cersei crowns Tommen. The boy is terrified, quiet, malleable. The faith returns in robes of mourning. They crown him in the sept with 7 bells and songs of vengeance, and in the crowd Arya watches. She doesn't flinch. She only marks one more name off her list. And now, Jon stands before a hall of lords, knights, maesters, and commoners. He lays down his sword. He speaks not of thrones, but of choices, of bloodshed, of unity, of survival. He offers them a new path. And just when you think they'll reject him, one by one, they rise, not to crown him, but to stand beside him. The bells of the sept still echoed when Cersei entered the throne room. She wore no mourning black, only crimson, a lioness in full bloom. Tommen, newly crowned, sat silent beside her, 10 years old and already a puppet. His crown was too big. For his head, his hands trembled on the throne's edge. Cersei didn't care. The realm, she said, needed strength, not tears, and strength, she claimed, required fire. That night, she summoned Qyburn. She gave him one command: burn the traitors. Out every last one. Let me break this down. Cersei's rage wasn't just about Joffrey. It wasn't even about the war. It was about control slipping through her fingers. Jon Snow's alliance threatened the throne, not with swords, but with ideas, and that terrified her more than dragons ever could. So she did what Lannisters always do when cornered. She cheated. At Qyburn's hand, the Red Keep's darkest chambers were opened. Old wildfire caches, buried since the Mad King's time, were relocated. Spies were embedded into the Riverlands. Fray bannermen suddenly re-emerged, pledging loyalty again, and from the Golden Company's holdings in Essos, gold flowed because Cersei had one last move left, one no one saw coming. Meanwhile, in Winterfell, the halls were warm, but the air was heavy. Jon sat beside the fire, Ghost curled at his feet. Across from him sat Ned. A long silence stretched. Between them, "You've changed," Ned finally said. "So have you," Jon replied. Ned's eyes were darker now, the edges of his honor sharpened with experience. But beneath it, the man who saved Jon all those years ago still remained. "I didn't raise you to be a king," Ned said softly. "I'm not one. But they look to you anyway." Jon looked into the flames. "They look to something that doesn't exist. I'm not a Stark, not a Targaryen, just a mistake caught between lies." Ned shook his head. "You're more Stark than many who carry the name. And blood doesn't make a king. Choice does." The next morning, Robb called. The council, not for war, for peace. He offered something no one expected. "I will relinquish the crown," Robb said, "if it means we end this war without more blood." Shock rippled across the room, but Robb was serious. He placed the crown on the table, its bronze gleaming beside a scroll. A new pact. Jon would serve as Lord Commander of the Confederation. Council. Dorne and the Reach would be offered equal say in governance. The North would remain independent. The Riverlands would follow Robb as warden, a kingdom of shared rule, an end to the cycle. But just as the pact was being signed, the twins caught fire. Smoke rose black against the southern sky, and with it, a raven arrived. 3 words: "They're coming north." Tywin Lannister's final plan had been hiding in plain sight. He hadn't vanished. He hadn't retreated. He'd spent the last moons building something monstrous, a southern coalition, not of bannermen, but of sellswords, exiled knights and desperate lords. With the Golden Company's ships and the Faith's blessing, they now marched from Harrenhal toward the Neck, not as an army of the Crown, but as an army of purging fire. The first to fall was White Harbour. Manderley men, still celebrating the pact, were ambushed by armoured zealots in 7-pointed star tabards. Tents were slashed, women and children burned alive. When the ravens returned to Winterfell, they carried feathers blackened. With soot, Robb rose from the war table. His face was stone. So it's fire they want. Jon stood beside him. Then it's the cold they'll get. Okay, you want tension? This is where the fuse hits the powder, because the Stark Alliance doesn't wait. They strike first. Glover, Karstark, Reed, and Blackwood forces march to Moat. Kaelin.Dorne sends sand steeds west from Old Town, burning everything Lannister-affiliated as they go. The Riverlands flood with soldiers, defending, but not retreating. And Jon? He makes a choice, one he swore he'd never make. He mounts a horse, rallies his men, and rides south, not as a bastard, not as a brother, as a commander of the Free Kingdoms. Meanwhile, Arya reaches Riverrun. There she hands Robb a letter she stole from Littlefinger's private chest in King's Landing. A letter written in Cersei's hand months ago. It read, "Let the Freys bleed for us. They are useless now. Burn their bridges and blame the North." The Red Wedding? It had always been her plan, and now Robb knew it. In Dorne, a new banner rises above Sunspear, not the sun and spear alone, but beside it, stitched in silver thread, a direwolf. The Martells officially declare Jon Snow their chosen commander. And then Cersei flips the board. In a last desperate move, she commands Qyburn to unleash the wildfire, not just in King's Landing, but in the Reach, barrels placed secretly in Golden Grove, Oakenshield, and Brightwater. Keep, explode, thousands die. The Tyrell, bannermen leaderless since Margaery's imprisonment and Loras's disappearance, fall into chaos. The breadbasket of Westeros turns to ash, and with it, the South fractures. Cersei's allies begin to turn on her, but she doesn't stop. She sends a final raven to Braavos, to the Iron Bank. She mortgages the Red Keep itself and buys one thing, an assassin. His target? Jon Snow. The snow fell in silence. Jon Snow stood alone on the ridge, just outside Moat Cailin, the howling wind pressing against his cloak. Ghost stood beside him, teeth bared. Behind them, campfires crackled across the hills, thousands of men, Northmen, and Riverlords alike, waiting for a battle that would decide everything. But the real war was already inches from his neck. The assassin didn't wear black, he wore silence. Braavosi trained, faceless, patient. He waited 3 days for Jon to walk alone. No guards, no Robb, no Ghost at his heels. But he misjudged one thing. He didn't. Arya Stark was watching. The blade came from behind, fast as lightning. Jon turned too late, but Arya moved quicker. Steel met steel in a blur. Her dagger, the same Valyrian blade used against Bran, clashed with the assassin's. Sparks flew. Ghost lunged, tearing into the faceless man's leg. Blood sprayed across the snow. Jon grabbed Longclaw from his side. 1 slash. 2. Done. The assassin dropped. Arya didn't smile. She just whispered, "One more name off the list." That night, Jon sat by the fire. Robb approached, sword across his back. "They won't stop," Robb said. "The Lannisters, the Faith, the Bank. Even if we win, they'll find another coin, another sword." Jon didn't answer at first. Then, "Let them try." He looked up. "We have something they never did." Robb raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Each other. At the Neck, the final stand was forming. Tywin's southern coalition was vast, 20,000 strong, bolstered by Golden Company's sellswords and faith zealots. They were marching toward the choke point, believing Moat Cailin still rebuilding. But it wasn't rubble anymore. It was a fortress. New walls, reinforced towers, and thousands of archers waiting in the trees, trenches flooded with icy water, barbed, traps laid deep. This time the North was ready. And yet, Tywin never intended to breach the moat. He wanted to draw Ned out, and it almost worked. But Ned Stark didn't ride to his death. He sent Robb. The Battle of the Neck began before dawn. Rain turned to sleet, mud into blood. The southern forces tried to push through the marshes, but every foot of land cost them 50 men. Brackens rained fire from the trees. Reeds harassed their flanks with poison-tipped arrows. Robb fought at the front, wolf-helm. Soaked in crimson, cutting down night after night with ice in his veins. It wasn't a battle, it was a trap closing. And when the Golden Company began to retreat, the north opened the marsh gates, flooding the battlefield. Thousands drowned in black water. Tywin's war machine, broken and still. He lived, captured, dragged in chains before Ned Stark at the walls of Winterfell. "You were my king once," Ned said coldly, "when you marched for Robert, when you rode against madness, and now look at you drowning in it." Tywin didn't beg, he didn't curse. He only said, "You've started something you can't control. These people, they don't want peace, they want blood." Ned stared at him, then turned to the headsman. "Give them yours." Tywin Lannister died like the empire he built, quiet, proud, alone. Far to the south, Cersei watched the fire burn in her fireplace. Alone now. No sons, no Tywin, no allies, only wine. She received the raven in silence. Her father, dead. Her army, shattered. The Reach, gone. Dorne, against her. The Faith, losing grip. The Realm, choosing Snow. So she did the only thing left. She crowned herself. No ceremony, no witnesses, just a mirror, and the words, "I am the Queen." She wouldn't fight. Not with swords. She would go down with the Red Keep. She filled the dungeons with wildfire, sealed the gates, waited. But the army never came. Only one rider, Jon alone. He walked through the front gate, unarmed. She met him in the throne room. The iron, monstrosity behind her. The city below, ash in the air. "You've come to kill me?" she asked. "No. Pity. You've lost." Cersei laughed. "No one loses. They just wait. One day someone else will light a match. You'll see." Jon didn't reply. He turned and walked away. As he reached the door, she called after. "Him. You think peace will last?" He looked back. "No. But I'll die trying." Back in the north, Robb and Arya stood atop the rebuilt walls of Moat Cailin. Robb watched the ravens fly south. "I always thought we'd die in battle," he said. Arya smiled faintly. "We still might, but if we don't," Robb added, "maybe we can build something better." Jon returned home weeks later, not as a king, not as a Targaryen, but as a man. The council met beneath the Godswood Dorne, the Riverlands, the North, the Iron Islands, begrudgingly, even a representative from what remained of the Reach. The final. Vote was unanimous. There would be no Iron Throne, only a circle of kings, a realm of free kingdoms joined not by force but by oath. And Jon, he would lead them not as ruler, but as Lord Protector, elected, removable, answerable to all. Years later, the stories would be told of Ned Stark, the man who united two kingdoms, of Robb Stark, the wolf who turned battles into victories, of Arya who ended kings with a blade and a whisper, of Tyrion who drank and survived, of Dorne who burned for peace, and of Jon Snow, the boy with no name, who gave everything and asked for nothing. The Game of Thrones ended, not with a crown, but with a choice.